Well, anyway, now let's discuss the 7 evil exes. Sans Gideon, since we already talked about him in the spoiler section. There's Matthew Patel, Lucas Lee, Todd Ingram, Roxy Richter, and the Kadianagi twins, Kyle and Ken.
Let's start things off with the first evil ex, Matthew Patel, who has the second best fight of the film, just below the final battle with Gideon. Patel is also particularly interesting to me because of the quirks of his character. He's an Indian who is this master of martial arts, but he also has mystic powers out of nowhere and can summon demon hipster chicks. This is when the film starts to get a bit more bonkers with the video game references and crazy things of this world, and it's honestly one of my favorite parts of the film because it just starts ramping up the crazy until the very end. Patel doesn't have all that much to his character to really build off of because you just see him for this one fight, but he has this weird hipster sense of style. He dresses like a pirate, but also dances when he talks like he's in some Bollywood movie. I like it a lot, but there's not much to really get a read on his character. Even his backstory is rather short, with him and Ramona only dating because she needed help taking down the jocks who kept hitting on her all the time. From what I can gather, she didn't like his style all that much either because she dumped him soon afterwards. Altogether, I really like Matthew Patel though. He's a good introduction to this wacky world, his fight is amazing, and he's just so weird to see in action.
Matthew Patel is basically unchanged from his comic counterpart, complete with his spectacle, pirate getup, and demon hipster chicks. As such though, I actually end up liking him more in the movie simply because the level of grandeur he likes to place onto himself is much more enjoyable in a visual medium. And Satya Baha does a terrific job at bringing that level of zaniness and over-the-top performance to Patel that is befitting of the first evil ex. I love how he builds himself up, but then he just has lines where he drops the act and is just confused at Scott's very own confusion. Like when he's flabbergasted that Scott didn't read his email. Matthew Patel is probably the simplest of all the evil exes. His main role is to introduce us to the League as a whole and do so in an extravagant way, and I'd say he succeeds at that for sure. Up next, we've got Evil Ex number 2, Lucas Lee. Like Patel, we don't really have too many comic differences with Lee, but we do have a small few. Lucas Lee is a Hollywood megastar who dated Ramona in high school and who is filming a movie in Toronto. But the movie and the comics, we get Lee tossing Scott right into the on-set castle, but the difference comes in what happens after. In the film, Scott battles Lee's stunt doubles before the two engage in a Hollywood-style showdown. That's one of the things I love about this film, to be honest. Each Evil Ex has their own unique style and gimmick, and Lucas Lee probably has one of the better ones, if only because seeing Chris Evans play a hotshot actor is simply amazing. Lee seems as if he's gonna let Scott off the hook before punching him square in the face. In the comics though, the two actually do pause after the toss into the castle as Lee asks Scott if he just wants to talk. Turns out that comic Lee is actually a pretty decent guy. We also find out from Lee himself that Ramona cheated on him, with who we soon find out to be Todd Ingram. We gotta mention this in the film as well, but all we're really told is that Ramona was quote unquote only dating Lucas up until she was dating Todd, not that she was cheating on him. Lee then meets his end in both the comic and the movie in the same way, where Scott tricks him into demonstrating his skateboarding skills on a long old rail, causing him to burst into coins at the very bottom. Personally speaking, I'm fine with either version of Lee. The comic version revealing that Ramona cheated on him was a nice way to reveal that flaw of Ramona, whereas the movie version is more action-packed, giving Lee more memorable lines. If I had to favor one or the other, I've gotta go with the film version, if only because of Evans. He's like, actually hilarious.
As for me, I am in love with Lucas Lee's character. He is my second favorite Evil Ex, just behind Gideon, and a large part of that is due to Evans' performance. I am a huge fan of Evans in just about every role he's been in. I loved him as Captain America, adored him in that film that we'll be reviewing in the future, and here is no different. I honestly think this may be my favorite performance of his because it is just so much fun to see him play this cocky asshole who is hamming up every damn scene. The shot where he gets out of his trailer and cracks his neck to the universal theme is just priceless. Evans has so much range to his acting talent, and I really have to give him props for this role. As for the character, Lucas is just funny to watch, and the cockiness of the character and use of stunt doubles cements him in my mind far more than some of the other evil exes. I just enjoy the character and honestly wanted to see more of him in this film.
Next up, we have my favorite Evil X in the film version, Todd Ingram. Todd continues in Lee's footsteps and starting to show more changes in the film. He still retains a lot of his defining aspects, but whereas in the film he's just a dumbass who thinks he's better than he actually is due to all his vegan powers, in the comics he's basically the same, only he's even more of an asshole. Volume 3 is able to delve more into Todd, as unlike the film, the confrontation with Scott takes place over the course of a few days. It's also revealed that Envy and Todd have known each other since elementary school, putting further reason as to why they got together. This builds up to Todd cheating on Envy with the drummer of their band, leading to Envy getting the let's both be girls moment where she kicks him in the balls. But since Envy and Scott's relationship isn't delved into as much in the film and Envy doesn't reappear like she does in the comics, I'm fine with all of this history not being in the film. The film also gives a better reason as to why the vegan police take away Todd's powers. Comic Scott doesn't trick Todd in the same way the movie Scott does, as Todd just has his powers taken away because he had a gelato of his own accord. So again, I like both versions, but I'd also take the movie version of Todd in this case. He's also just one of the most fun Evil X's to watch, and he has some of the best lines in the film. Brendan Routh sells the crap out of the role, and he makes Todd my favorite Evil X in the film.
As for me, Todd is my third favorite Evil X of the movie, falling just behind Lucas Lee and Gideon. The thing I love about Todd is just how much of a clueless douche he really is. His psychic vegan powers are awesome, but this power, coupled with his quips about the cleaning lady coming to dust on Monday, are just priceless. What really made me love Todd though was the base battle, showing how much better he was at Scott in just about every aspect. He's stronger, he's better at base, he has psychic powers. The only way that Scott can win in this case is by tricking him, which I think really works for the character. At any rate, Todd's cluelessness got a huge laugh out of me every single time, and I think Ruth's performance was simply wonderful. That just leaves us 3 more X's to discuss. Do you want to take on Roxy first, considering she gets some of the least amount of development in the movie?
Absolutely. Roxy definitely has more to her in the comics compared to the film, and it's possibly my favorite Evil X in the comics who isn't Gideon. Which is funny since she's the Evil X in what's possibly the most story-crammed volume of the entire series. Volume 4's main focus is on Lisa and what her reintroduction means for Scott and Ramona's relationship, and as such, a lot of Roxy's involvement actually comes from this very aspect. Roxy tries desperately to get Ramona to break up with Scott by trying to convince her that Scott is cheating on her with Lisa, and Ramona does start to buy this thanks to the glow, which almost causes her to fall back into Gideon's hands. Helping this is that in the comics, Roxy and Ramona don't actually seem to hate each other that much. They have baggage, of course, but Ramona even lets Roxy sleep at her place for a night, so the two don't seem to be on the worst of terms. Roxy makes more of an impact on Scott and Ramona's relationship than any other Evil X, even the twins, and Volume 5 is where the two break up in the first place. Unlike the Evil X's who came before her, Roxy doesn't simply try to go after Scott, but tries to break the two up, which she knows would emotionally wound Scott. It makes me like her compared to most of the other Evil X's, and she's in my top 3 because of this. She even taught Ramona how to use the subspace, so that's neat. In the movie, all of the plot surrounding Lisa is gone since Volume 4's story was almost non-existent. So because of this, Roxy just gets her introduction scene where Scott punches her in the boob, and the actual fight with her against Scott and Ramona, which is mostly reminiscent of the fight between Ramona and Envy from Volume 3 of the comics. Complete with taking Roxy out by poking the back of her knee. But whereas Envy is just sidelined from this, Roxy orgasms to death. Okay then. I don't mind this too much given the lack of time, but it does cause Roxy to just be another Evil X, much like the Katayanagi twins. Only this time, she's a lesbian. She also seems to have a worse relationship with Ramona in the film, which I would have liked to see explored a little more. I'd say that if they were going to take that approach, then I would have liked to see a reversal of the comic storyline. Have Roxy try to convince Scott that pursuing Ramona is a waste of time, given how much she has cheated in the past. Given his line after the fight where he says, "Is there anyone in this club who you haven't slept with?" I think it could have worked. It keeps the same point of Roxy's character while also keeping her screen time to a minimum. I still like Roxy in the movie, but unlike in the comics, she isn't my favorite Evil X. That honor goes to Todd Ingram. But what do you think, Zen?
Well, first of all, I gotta say that I love how Roxy was introduced early on in the film, and we don't get an idea who she really is until later. It shakes things up a bit because we expect her to be the next Evil X, but then Todd becomes the focus. I think that was really clever adapting there. Honestly, you couldn't fit all of her story into the film from what you're saying, but I do wish either Envy was given the fight since she leaves the story after Todd's defeat, or that Roxy had a bit more screen time. This is where I think maybe cutting down the content adapted from Volume 1 might have helped a bit, but what we got worked well and was one of the coolest fights in the movie, hands down. As for her character, it's alright. She is the lesbian of the evil exes, and that's about it. She's angry, she's a ninja, she has amazing goth clothes that I really want to wear. She does have a bit of a weeb vibe from the way she acts, but we don't get much about her personality or character besides that. Honestly, I'm fine with it because the movie needed to cram everything in, but it does feel like there was room to explore her character a bit further. Still, I enjoyed her presence and like her well enough. Not as much as Gideon and the previous three though.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. It's just that the other evil exes managed to keep a lot of their main traits in the film, so Roxy just being another one to attack and not having that element of trying to break the two up puts her a step down for me.
Finally, we have the Katyanagi twins, Kyle and Ken. To be honest, they get absolutely nothing in this film. They have personality in the way they act, but they have no actual lines in the movie, and we don't learn anything about them as characters. I can't speak for the comic, but there's not much for me to comment on in this case. They look cool and douchey, they play keyboard pretty well. That's all I got. They're my least favorite evil exes in the film, mostly because they have nothing to their characters.
Well, like I said before, even in the comics, the Katyanagi twins don't really get much. What we do get is serviceable, like how after they found out that Ramona was cheating on them at the same time, they swore to do everything together from that moment onward, but that's about it. The Katyanagi twins' purpose in Volume 5 of the comics is more to affect the development of the other characters. Keep in mind, this is the same volume where Ramona finds out that Scott cheated on her with knives at the same time, which hits really close to home for her, not just for the obvious reason that it's cheating, but also because it's something she herself is guilty of. They also beat Scott about 3 times before he put them away, going as far as to constantly toy with him and even kidnap Kim, which made them a great obstacle for him in what's easily his toughest volume emotionally. Oh, and they also have robots. I didn't know how to segue into that naturally, so yeah, robots. When adapting them for the movie, a lot of what they cause can't properly be adapted, which is why I'm perfectly fine with them being relegated to a really cool music battle against Sexbomb, which is also one of the highlights of the film. So at the very least, I'm glad they were given that.
I will admit, I love the battle itself. Throughout the film, we get a really good mix of physical fights and musical battles, and this is one of the best. I love the part when Scott hits the kick pedal and electricity simply ripples all around them. The Sound Yeti versus the Frost Dragons was legitimately cool to watch, especially because it was done entirely in CG, but it doesn't look rubbery or fake. It just came out looking cool, so yeah. While I can't say anything definitive about the twins, their fight was damn cool. Finally, while we already discussed Gideon in great detail, I did want to bring up the fact that there was originally supposed to be a final battle against Gideon in a giant mech, and I am super sad that it didn't make the cut.
Yeah, I'm pretty torn on this exclusion. On the one hand, I'm pretty satisfied with how Gideon was taken out in the final product, but on the other hand, giant robot. Just giant robot. I can't argue with that. Well, I think we've talked as much as we could about the evil exes without going on and on for hours. But we're still not done. We've still got Scott's 2 ex-girlfriends, Envy Adams and Knives Chow. To start off, let's talk about Envy. I've seen a bit of a divide on Envy actually. Some people are satisfied with what she got in the movie, whereas others think that more from the comic should have been kept in. It's worth noting actually that in the original draft of the film, titled Scott Pilgrim's Little Life, Envy was supposed to be Ramona's 4th evil ex in place of Roxy. This explains why Roxy's fight takes a lot of its cues from Ramona and Envy's fight from the comics. On the one hand, having Envy be Ramona's 4th evil ex and still having her date Todd would have been a nice way of extending that plotline in the film. But on the other hand, and I'm very thankful that this was changed to be more comic accurate. Making Envy Ramona's ex would require completely rewriting Envy entirely, and I'd rather just have another ex for Scott so that we can see more of his dirty laundry.
I briefly discussed this earlier in the review, but the more I think about it, I like how Envy relates to Scott more. I would love to have seen more of her or more of Roxy, but getting the two to have a decent amount of screen time is a balancing act considering how much they had to adapt. I don't know how I would do it because I'm not a director, but I think Envy should have at least revealed her backstory because she is essential to the Todd portion of the film. Personally though, I love Envy in this film. She just has this wonderful presence, due in large part to Brie Larson, who not only played the part wonderfully, but performed and sang her own songs in the movie, which is quite awesome. I love her singing voice, and the acting really sold Envy for me. What did you think of Envy in the film, Phil?
Well, like I said before, much like other portions of the film, there's a bit of a divide on Envy on whether or not she got enough screen time. It's easy to excuse this in the case of someone like Roxy or the Katayanagi twins, but it can be harder to excuse it in the case of a more crucial character such as Kim or, in this case, Envy. The fact that Envy's appearance from Volume 6 is completely omitted is fine by me, since it must have come as a surprise to the crew that a character like Envy, who hadn't appeared for 3 volumes, was suddenly returning for one last appearance. So I'm not bothered that she never reappears after Todd's section of the film. At the same time though, I would have liked at least a single additional scene placed somewhere in that section to explain how Scott actually screwed up his relationship with Envy. In fact, unlike Kim, who we still get a fairly decent understanding of why the two broke up, with Envy, nothing about their breakup really indicates that Scott did anything wrong. In the comics, it is highly suggested that Scott was the instigator of the argument that led to Envy dumping him. We get no mention of this in the film, and personally, I would have liked to see a scene that suggested something similar. Yeah, I know that having a single case wouldn't have pleased other comic fans, but like I said before, I myself personally am not asking for too much in this case. But aside from this one aspect about Envy, I absolutely love her portrayal in the film. Despite the fact that they don't delve into Scott and Envy's past, the song Envy sings about Scott on stage is great in suggesting that she hates Scott for her own reasons, insinuating that Scott was also at fault for their relationship coming to an end. Which honestly makes me wish that they had delved into it more, but I digress. I also like the difference from the comic where instead of Envy dumping Todd after it's revealed that Todd cheated on her, nothing of the sort really happens in the film, leaving Envy alone to figure herself out after Scott calls her Natalie. I like the way that her story wrapped up in the film, and if they had just given us one more scene with her, you wouldn't be hearing any criticisms from me about her. Especially when Brie Larson nails the role perfectly. I could not think of anyone else to portray Envy, and Brie probably gives one of the best performances in the film.
Yeah, I do wish they had delved more into the stuff with her and Scott, especially because the more I listen to the song, the more it lines up with how comic Scott acts, and it makes me think that he was the one at fault. Can't say much more than that, but it's interesting nonetheless, and Brie Larson nails the role, so I can't complain when she's portrayed this well. So, Phil, shall we bring out the knives?
Well, I'm tired, and I think I've had enough character analysis to last me the next few months, but certainly. Throughout this giant-ass character section, I've been going back and forth between the comics and the film, discussing what changed in the latter, and if those changes were still serviceable for a 2-hour condensed version of a 6-volume comic book series. But of all of the characters, I can honestly say that the best comic-to-film transition came in the form of Knives Chow. Knives is amazing in this film, and before I delve into why from a character standpoint, I need to talk about her actress. Ellen Wong is simply perfect in the role. Honestly, even though Knives in the comics is one of the brightest spots in the cast, in the film, she has enough energy to outshine even the Energizer Bunny. And it's all thanks to Ellen's perfect delivery. Along with Brie, she delivers one of the best performances in the film. In terms of why Knives was handled so well in the film, I honestly think that it comes down to the original ending. Since she was originally supposed to get together with Scott, a large portion of the narrative is solely dedicated to her. And I think it all works very well. As a matter of fact, it may even work slightly better than it does in the comics. In the comics, Knives finds out that Scott had cheated on her near the end of Volume 2, but she doesn't act on this at all up until Volume 5, where she finally tells Ramona about it. On top of this, she also still loves Scott across the two in-between volumes, despite having the knowledge that he cheated on her. Now, I don't dislike that plot element in the slightest, and I think that portraying Knives as someone who knows the truth, yet can't help but love Scott anyway, is an interesting direction to take the story. The one problem I have with it is that it makes her dislike of Ramona really unwarranted, as she knows for a fact that Scott double-crossed her. In the film, she doesn't find out that Scott cheated on her until the climax with Gideon, making her hatred more justified, and the end where she and Ramona forgive Scott and the two team up all the more sweeter. So essentially, the film gave us all of the great Knives material from the first 2 to 3 volumes, while also improving on my one main flaw with her in the comics. So overall, it makes Knives one of the best characters in the movie. Top 3 for sure. We're just missing the part where she hooks up with Kim.
If you ask me, Knives is one of the 4 characters that is truly fleshed out in the film. We have Scott and Ramona as a focus for sure, and Gideon gets a lot as well, but Knives is the 4th main character for me, and it all boils down to one main thing that I've been wanting to discuss from the start. Knives is also an extremely flawed character. She gets obsessed with Scott in the same way that he obsesses over Ramona. When dumped, she stalks Scott, much like Scott did at the party for Ramona, and changes herself rather than realizing that Scott is at fault. She ignores a lot of what Scott tells her when she's infatuated and keeps bringing envy into his life, especially during the scene in the backstage meet and greet. She also keeps calling Ramona fat simply because Scott likes Ramona instead of her. Knives honestly feels a lot like a female version of Scott in the way that she deals with her problems, and I find that very interesting.
Yeah, I won't lie, I think Knives is one of the only characters in the film who didn't do much wrong, but she isn't flawless. This is still Scott Pilgrim after all. That being said though, I feel like she's kind of justified in going a little cuckoo given the fact that no one really makes an effort to reach out to her and talk to her about what really happened. Not a flaw with the movie, mind you, just a reflection on the fact that the characters in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World aren't really great people. Well, that takes care of practically all the big players. About time, I know. But before we move on, let's discuss all of the supporting roles. It's very rare that I come out of a TV show or video game being able to remember all of the supporting characters, let alone a film, but with Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, I remember all of them. There's Julie Powers, a friend of Scott's. Nah, that's not right. An acquaintance of Scott's from university that is constantly at his throat and is somehow able to censor her own swears. And there's Stacy Pilgrim, Scott's younger sister, who is really the more mature one. In any other film, Stacy would be the character to be there when Scott is feeling low and encourage him to get back up. In this movie's case though, Stacy's just like, yeah, life sucks. Time to move on, bro. Heck, the characters who only have like a single scene are memorable. There's Kameu, who literally knows everyone, including you. Crash and the Boys, a rival band to Sex Bomb at the beginning of the film who sing 5-second songs. And the motherfucking vegan police. Probably the only police that are ever gonna be worth a damn. And then, of course, we can't go on without mentioning Wallace. Wallace is Scott's gay roommate who's always there to give him advice while also being a massive tool while doing it. I love Wallace to bits because he's the purest side character that you could possibly have. One that doesn't need to have much more purpose other than emotionally supporting the main lead and being fun to watch in his own right.
Wallace is one of my favorite characters in the film because he toes this line. He's a super nice friend to Scott, but he also kicks him out at times and uses tough love to help him improve as a person. He tells Scott that he needs to break up with Knives and not cheat on her anymore, but he's also constantly stealing Stacy's boyfriends and sleeping with everyone around him. It's like he's a super awesome person and friend, but he also does some things that would be completely horrible in a normal relationship. I simply love Wallace and could not get enough of him in this film. Thank you so much for being a gay icon for people everywhere. We salute you.
And at last, that covers all of the characters. Yeah, as you can tell, the characters are the heart and soul of Scott Pilgrim. It's not the video game references, it's not the plot, and it isn't even really the themes. The themes are only really there to complement the relationships that we see developed throughout the story. As I've no doubt drilled into your skulls at this point, the comics were able to be more in depth with a lot of these characters, but what I also hope I've made clear is how much I really don't think that matters for the most part. Edgar Wright knew that he obviously couldn't shove all 6 volumes into 2 hours, so he made the decision to focus on Scott, Ramona, and Knives, and have the others there to service their story. I've heard the idea suggested that maybe they should have made 2 films instead of 1. Have the first film adapt the first 3 comics, and the second film, probably going under the title of the 5th volume, Scott Pilgrim vs. the Universe, focusing on volumes 4 to 6. And while I would have liked this approach as well, the film's box office turnout tells me that we probably wouldn't have even gotten a second film. So I'm happy with the direction they ended up going with.
It's easy for us to say that they should have included more of the comics, but when presented with 6 different volumes, one of which was unfinished at the time, it's hard to imagine the final product ending up this good. I remember Aragon, and Artemis Fowl, and fucking Percy Jackson and the Olympians, and how those adaptations wound up from just one book. Edgar Wright took his time with this, reading the comics thoroughly, working heavily with O'Malley, and making sure this was as faithful as possible. There aren't many people willing to do the level of work that Wright put into this film. So, even if some of the characterization was left on the cutting room floor, I still think these characters came out amazing.
With that being said, let's take a look at the technical side of things, and thankfully we don't have as much to talk about here. First and foremost, as if it even needed saying, but the film is absolutely gorgeous. Not only is the film shot brilliantly thanks to my favorite cinematographer of all time, Bill Pope, but the amount of attention given to every ounce of detail is utterly phenomenal. Rice shot a lot of the scenes at the very locations shown in the comics, which themselves are real location. Plus, if you're a high top films kind of guy and you have a massive hard-on for practical effects, then I implore you to look at the behind the scenes of this movie. There is an entire documentary as well as extensive behind the scenes footage that details just how they pulled off some of these shots. Did you know that they had Chris Evans throw a dummy Scott at the castle and have a stunt double take the real fall that Scott does? I didn't. Did you know that they changed the set on the fly when Scott was in the bathroom instead of using a green screen? I didn't. Did you know that it took Michael Cera 33 takes to land the package in the trash? Well, okay, I did know about that, and it isn't as impressive, but you get the gist of it. Not only that, but the amount of foreshadowing and Easter eggs within the imagery alone is amazing. The numbers of the evil Exes showing up whenever they appear, 7 literal Exes appearing all over the place. Edgar Wright mentions in the documentary that his ideas always exceeded the budget he's presented with, but I'm gonna be honest, if this is him on a limited budget, then I would love to see the kind of movie he would make on a Marvel budget. And just as I record that, I remembered that Edgar Wright was supposed to direct Ant-Man before being booted off, and now I'm sad. This film's cinematography is some of the best I've seen in a film, period, and I simply adore it.
I gotta give kudos to the set designers for not only that bathroom switch around, which is theater levels of ingenuity, but they completely remade the club from scratch and dirtied and graffitied it up to reflect the original look of the dive bar, which had since closed. There is so much attention to detail, it is astonishing. When they aren't using a ton of practical effects, they're using a mix of wires and blue screen and CG, but it all feels seamless. It never feels fake to me, even during the final battle. I've watched the behind the scenes where they edit out the people and change them into coins. Just the sheer amount of raw talent on display is simply outstanding. Edgar Wright, you are brilliant being able to put this all together. We also need to discuss the editing as well, because damn, this is good. The cuts all seamlessly blend together to keep the film moving at a rather fast pace, but it doesn't feel too fast to follow. The fight scenes are super fast and extremely well coordinated, but feel real, especially because we can actually see what is going on here. Wright hired stunt choreographers recommended by Guillermo del Toro, of all people, and they made some superb work. My personal favorites are the fight between Scott and Patel and the final fight with Gideon. Both of these remind me of something out of Shaolin Soccer or Ip Man, with the level of fighting prowess on display.
As an amateur editor myself, I can only dream that I could one day edit something as good as Scott Pilgrim. The editing in this film is kinetic and transitions from shot to shot in a way that keeps the audience's attention at all times. I've heard some people say that they don't like how this film never seems to slow down, but honestly, I love that aspect about it. Yes, if a film doesn't slow down in order to develop its characters and just jumps from set piece to set piece, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna get a mess. But in Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, every scene matters for these characters. We aren't jumping from scene to scene just so we can get to the next cool moment, but also so we can learn more about these characters. And I commend the editing for being able to seamlessly transition to other scenes without making it feel like we're wasting time. Also, the fight scenes are simply amazing. This rivals films like the first Kung Fu Panda and the prequel trilogy as having some of the best fight scenes in all of film. I'm not full fat films and I'm not an expert at breaking fights down, but if I had to give my favorites, I would say that Scott and Knives vs. Gideon, Scott and Ramona vs. Roxy, and Sex Bomb vs. the Katayanagi twins are my top 3. The former two for being excellently choreographed fights, and the latter for being a brilliant clash of 2 genres of music. And speaking of music, hot damn does this soundtrack kick ass! To start off, Brian Lee O'Malley himself wrote Scott Pilgrim as being heavily influenced by music. Heck, the main character was based off of a song, for crying out loud. He had made playlists for the songs that he had listened to while creating each volume of the comics, leading to the makers of the film taking the best aspects of them and translating them into the film's soundtrack. The result is a soundtrack that is just as kick-ass as its 90s grunge. All of Sex Bomb's songs were written by Beck Hansen, and he does a terrific job with the music. We Are Sex Bomb, Garbage Truck, Threshold, Summertime, heck, even the really sad rendition of Scott's Ramona song. It's all excellent stuff, and I unironically jam out every time I listen to it. Also, as if to impress us even more, Matthew Weber and Alison Pill had to learn how to play the guitar and drums respectively for this film. I love these people. I want to meet these people and tell them just how much I love them.
Where do I even begin? The opening theme of this film alone is enough to make me fall in love. Scott Pilgrim is a film about action and romance, but also about music. It gives us so many different styles, such as the indie grunge of Sex Bomb, the angst of Crash and the Boys with their emo hard rock sound, the Clash at Demon Head with its pop rock, and even the Katayanagi twins and their Daft Punk-esque keyboard style. Edgar Wright described the band who wrote the twins' music as the Japanese Beck, and it shows. In another film, all of these different musical genres could feel conflicting, but they work together here as a cohesive whole. One thing I have to pride Michael Cera on is the fact that he knew how to play bass, but he actually had to work and dumb down his ability a bit because Scott can't play well. There's so many little touches here that I could go on for hours, but I think we've used up enough of your time.
Well, I think this review's gone on long enough. Wanna wrap this up, Zen?
Certainly. Well, overall, I simply adore Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. While my favorite film changes from year to year, Scott Pilgrim is one of my top films, and I think everyone should give it at least a watch. In terms of presentation, it is one of the best made films I have ever seen and should be shown in schools on how to do visual effects, practical effects, and fight choreography. The writing is insanely quotable and hilarious. The acting is brilliant. The story is simple but effective and is a good look into relationships and flawed human beings. What little issues I do have with the movie are very minor, and even then, these issues are related more to how this was adapted rather than how this is as a film. It may not be a perfect adaptation, but it does a wonderful job taking the spirit of the source material and turning it into a cohesive product. It's certainly different from the comics, but Brian O'Malley stated in the making of featurette that adaptations are supposed to be different and that the film captured the spirit of his work regardless. Personally, I give Scott Pilgrim vs. the World a Kana and Chiaki super stamp of approval, meaning it survives licensed media limbo with flying colors. This film works on so many different levels, and I cannot recommend it enough.
As I said at the start of this review, Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is my favorite movie of all time. There are other films that I hold on just as high of a pedestal, such as Spider-Man 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Wolf Children, and Lilo and Stitch, but Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is a film that I can watch over and over and over and over and over and over again while never getting bored. And those extra overs aren't hyperbole. There was a time where I had watched the film at least 10 times within the span of 2 months. To put things into perspective, I rarely watch something more than once in a short amount of time like that. You need to be extraordinarily good for me to want to watch a movie that many times that fast. This is absolutely my favorite Edgar Wright film, it's my favorite comic book film, it's my favorite film of the previous decade, and yes, it is still my favorite film of all time. Although, as you could probably tell from this video, I also highly implore you to read the comics, because for as much as I love the movie, my love for the comics is just as big. I'll definitely be as pleased as Punch when Zen finally gets around to reviewing them. With that being said, it's been a silent few years for Scott Pilgrim, huh? We got the comics and this film, then we got a video game, which unfortunately got delisted back in 2014, and then we got a card game titled Scott Pilgrim's Precious Little Card Game, which I badly want to get. But then, that's really it. Until this past year or two, of course, where Scott Pilgrim got a bit of a resurgence, especially thanks to the film's 10-year anniversary. We got a new board game titled Scott Pilgrim Miniaturizes the World, which, like the card game, I also badly want to get. The comics got yet another re-release. Most of the film's cast live-streamed an entire script reading of the film, and without a doubt the best of all, we got a re-release of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the video game. And as someone who always regretted not getting the game while it was on 7th gen consoles, this could not make me any happier. It just feels so good to see justice come to a long-forgotten game. I don't know, maybe it's best to just let a franchise just meet its end and stay dead, but heck, I'd love an animated series that more closely covers the comics. I will always adore the movie, but God, could you imagine? Well, only time will tell, and as we already know, Brian Lee O'Malley still has all the passion in the world for this series. As long as he keeps showing his love for his creation and we keep showing our love in return, I see Scott Pilgrim having a long life as a cult classic, no matter what form it takes.
Unfortunately, as you may have guessed by now, Scott Pilgrim bombed hard at the box office, making only $48 million from its $85 million budget. While it has been doing much better lately, with word of mouth and Blu-ray sales, that just isn't enough for some studios. It has remained a cult classic for years now, but it has a very special place in my heart. My college roommate used to play it every single night as we went to bed, and I can probably quote the entire film verbatim by now, and the fact that I haven't gotten sick of it after all these years is testament to its quality. However, I hope that this review helps to promote the film just a bit more. The film is still licensed by Universal Pictures and can be found for around $8 on Amazon.ca and regular Amazon for all you non-Canadians out there. And while you're at it, go pick up Scott Pilgrim vs. the World the game, because after 6 years of it being taken off PSN and Xbox Live Arcade, seeing it make a return brought the two of us so much joy. Fun fact, we had this review all ready to go with a bunch of jokes at the ready about how the game was delisted, and then Brian Lee O'Malley announced the remaster of the game, and we had to update things just a tad. Not complaining for the record, far from it. I just find it funny how on several occasions now, these scripts have become outdated with present day info, and we've had to rewrite entire paragraphs to accommodate. With all that being said, I'm Zenith Warrior Princess, the cutest of buns.
And I'm Phil Kanzarovsky, the king of ships, telling you that Kim and Knives are OTP.
And with that, we will see you all next time. If you like what you see, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so that you too can join the Bun Squad, my legion of cute, fluffy bunnies who watch my videos. And you know how back in the Dark Crystal review, I mentioned how I was toying with the idea of bringing back Patreon requests? Well, I've decided to pull the trigger on it. So if you have $20 to spare, toss it my way over on Patreon and you can request one thing for me to review every 6 months as long as you're a patron. But there are only 3 slots available for this tier, so if you're interested, pledge while you still can. These tiers tend to go pretty quickly.
And And if you want to check out my stuff, like before, you can find me over on my channel, which will be down in the description below, as well as on Twitter at real_PhilipCans. And of course, don't forget to hit that bell for either of us to make sure that you are up to date with both of our content.
And with that, I want to leave you guys off with a little bit of a story before we leave for today. It's very personal to me, and it's one of the reasons I hold this film as close as I do. It all revolves around Scott Pilgrim himself as a character. I've heard many people discuss Scott in recent years and how he's kind of a bad person and how they're ashamed to have identified with him when they were younger. While we have stated that the point of these characters is that they aren't good people and need to grow, a large number of filmgoers took the incredibly wrong message from this and saw Scott from the beginning of the film as a role model. This is where I have to come to terms with my own personal history. You see, when I first saw this film, I not only identified with the negative sides of Scott, I had lived it. The summer before I saw Scott Pilgrim, I was working at the same summer camp that I brought up before. I was 18 at the time, and I was dating a girl online who lived in Japan. We had never met face to face, but we chatted online every day. It was something simple for me because up until this point, every girl that I had dated had either moved away or dumped me without warning or explanation. I was in a very bad place and just started this relationship for something simple. Then, that summer at camp, we had the first ever female employee join us, and I was simply infatuated, to the point that I forgot everything else around me. For some reason, she actually found me charming and kissed me one night when we were alone together. We also spent a few nights just being together, although we never really said that we were dating. The problem is that she had a boyfriend already and I had my online relationship. I was a complete asshole to even keep this going without telling her, and I didn't know how to tell her at the time, until one night I confided in a friend about what was going on and they told me to break it off. I immediately broke up with my online girlfriend, but the other girl found out, leading to an outright explosive breakup between everyone involved. We were horrible people, plain and simple, but I think that's part of life as well. We all make mistakes, all of us. We need to make them in order to learn and grow and be better people. Unfortunately, that's just the tip of the asshole I was back then. I wasn't a good person before my transition. There were some things in my past that I would rather forget and move past. To be honest, I really hope that I can someday, but these things continue to haunt me most nights. I want to grow and be a better person myself, and hopefully make amends for my past in the same way that Scott did. Perhaps one day I can forgive myself for everything. Perhaps one day.
Hey, don't beat yourself up too hard, Zen. Everyone has their dirty laundry, even if some people don't want to admit to it. You are a good person, even if you've done bad things in the past. It's important not to undermine that bad stuff, but it's also important to have the will to say that you're a good person now if you truly believe that you've changed. And to believe that, you need people who can vouch for you. And honestly, I can think of few people in my life better than you.
Thanks, Phil. That really means a lot. And thanks for spending the 1-year anniversary with me reviewing Scott Pilgrim. I have just a few more things I want to cover, and then I will most definitely jump into Fate. It's a promise.
That makes me happy, Zen. Really, it does. But before then, review whatever you want to. I'm gonna head off to do some stuff over on my channel. I'll be back to help you out with Fate. Take care, Z.
You too, Phil. Please take care of yourself.
Actually, Zen, before I go, there's something I've been meaning to ask you.
What is it, Phil?
Well, I've been wondering for a little while now, how did Kana and Chiaki become half human again?
Oh, well, you see, at the end of the Romance Dawn episode, the two came back from an adventure in space to this sushi planet or whatever. While there, they found the human-human fruit and both took a bite to turn into cat humans.
Ah, okay, I get you. Wait, what? They both ate the fruit?
Yeah, that's what they said anyway. Is something wrong?
That doesn't sound right, but why?
Is everything okay, Phil?
Zen, I may be back sooner than expected. There's something I've really gotta look into. Just move on to whatever you're gonna review, and I'll talk to you about it later, okay? I'll see you soon.
Hey, wait! And there he goes.
What's wrong, Mother?
Oh, it's nothing, Chiaki. Philip just took off, leaving me a bit confused.
Oh? How so?
Well, he asked how you and Kana became cat humans, and when I told him the answer, he got all panicky for some reason.
I'd ignore him. He's probably just being a prat.
Chibi, that's not nice. He's not an idiot. A bit intense at times, maybe, but he's not stupid.
I'd beg to differ, Mother. He seems like nothing but trouble, if you ask me.
Why are you so angry at Philip, Chibi? He's a really great guy if you got to know him.
Mother, if you go around trusting everyone you meet, one of these days you're going to end up in a whole heap of trouble that you aren't going to be able to claw your way out of.
You aren't making any sense, Chiaki. What's gotten into you lately?
Nothing, okay? It's nothing. Now, please, can we just drop the subject?
But...
I said drop it, Zenith!
Chiaki?
I mean... I need to get some fresh air. I'm sorry. I'll talk to you later.
Chiaki? What's been going on around here lately? I wonder if I should report this to Linkara. No. It's too soon for that. This isn't enough to tell if she's possessed or not. I need time to clear my head too. Maybe it's about time I write that letter. Then I can talk to Chiaki again. Yeah, I'm sure whatever it is, she just needs to talk about it. Everything's going to be just fine.